Seriously, I've never been a fan. No idea why I even agreed to it. Maybe it was peer pressure, didn't want to be the odd one out. Sounded harmless enough, right? A weekend in the woods with my 4 best buds, Jake, Lem, Sarah and Emily. We packed up all the usual stuff: tents, snacks, enough firewood to burn for days. Seemed like the kind of adventure we'd look back on and laugh about, years down the line. The hike to the campsite, way longer than I expected. The forest was thick, like really thick. The kind where the trees block out the sun, and it's twilight even in the middle of the day. Smelled like damp leaves and rotting wood. Beautiful in a creepy way, Like the trees were leaning in, listening to us as we trudged along. Something was bugging me though. This weird feeling I couldn't shake. Felt like we'd passed the same tree before. It was a weird one, trunk split low to the ground in a jagged Y shape. Just your imagination, I muttered to myself. But then I glanced back over my shoulder, and bam, there was that Y tree again. Felt like it was following us or something. Weirded me out, but no one else seemed to notice. "Are we almost there?" I asked, voice cracking a bit. Broke the silence anyway. Got a bunch of groans from Jake and Emily, but Sarah didn't say anything. She was walking ahead but slower now, head turning every few steps, glancing back over her shoulder. When we finally got to the clearing, I stopped. Something felt off. Not dangerous exactly, just wrong. The fire pit was already there, a perfect circle of stones. Didn't look old or weathered, like someone had just built it. Even the trees around the clearing were too perfect, spaced out all evenly, trunks leaning in a bit. Conveniently joked, but her laugh sounded kinda forced. I couldn't shake this feeling that we weren't the first ones here. Not by a long shot. As we started setting up tents, I saw Sarah staring into the woods again. Her hands were shaking a little as she unfolded her tent. "You okay?" I asked. She nodded but wouldn't meet my eyes. "Yeah, just I don't like how quiet it is." Night came down fast. Too fast 1 minute. The sky was all red and orange the next, bam, black as ink. Didn't feel like the sun set, more like someone just flipped a switch. The fire crackled and popped, throwing shadows that danced all over the trees. The clearing felt smaller now, the trees pressing in closer than before. I looked over at Sarah. She wasn't laughing like the others. Her eyes were glued to the fire pit, fingers tracing shapes in the dirt. "Sarah," I asked quietly. She jumped, wiping the dirt off her palm and looking up at me, eyes wide. "You okay?" "Fine," she said, too quickly. But then that whistle came again. Her head snapped towards the woods. She stared, unblinking, lips moving slightly, but no sound came out. "Did you hear that?" I asked, heart starting to race. "Don't," she whispered, voice barely there. "Don't look for it." Her words sent a shiver down my spine. Before I could ask more, Jake groaned, loud. "Dude, it's just the wind." I wasn't so sure. That whistle didn't sound like wind. It was deliberate. "No, seriously," I said. "It sounded like someone whistling," Liam groaned. "Don't start with the creepy stuff. You're just trying to freak us out." But I wasn't. I knew what I'd heard. The others brushed it off, but then it came again. Louder this time, clearer. A long, deliberate whistle, like someone calling a dog. Echoed through the trees, too sharp, too human. "Probably just some hiker," Emily said, but her voice wavered. "Hikers don't whistle like that at night," I whispered. The air felt heavier after that. The laughter and chatter died down, replaced by this uneasy silence. We all retreated to our tents early, but I couldn't sleep. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of branches made my heart jump. And then, just as I was starting to drift off, I heard it again. The whistle. This time it was closer. The fire had died down to glowing embers, barely lighting up the clearing. The whistle came again, clearer now. Echoed through the trees, too sharp, too human. I sat bolt upright in my tent, heart pounding. Unzipped the flap. The forest was still, but something was wrong. I felt it right away, the way the clearing felt different. The trees seemed closer than they'd been earlier, gnarled branches twisting towards the tents like bony fingers. The fire pit looked untouched, stones unnervingly clean, like no fire had ever burned there. I stumbled out, grabbing my flashlight. "Jake, Lem." My voice sounded hollow in the silence. Then I saw them. Footprints. Bare, human footprints pressed into the dirt. They led from the edge of the clearing, straight to the tents, stopping right outside mine. A twig snapped behind me. "Sarah," I whispered, turning slowly. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, barely visible in the dim light. Face pale, lips parted, like she was about to say something, but she didn't. "What are you doing out here?" I asked, voice trembling. She tilted her head slightly, expression unreadable. "It's already too late," she said softly, always to herself. "What?" I stepped towards her, but she turned and vanished into the shadows. I froze, breath hitching. That's when I heard the breathing. Slow, deliberate, and just behind me. I didn't turn around. Couldn't. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to move, to run, to do something. But I stayed frozen, paralyzed by the sound of that breathing. It was close, too close. Wet and uneven, like whoever it was had been running for miles. The back of my neck prickled, and I saw I could feel the faint warmth of their exhale against my skin. You know that feeling, that crawling sensation, the one that tells you something's wrong even before your brain catches up. Like when you're walking home alone at night, and you feel eyes on you, hidden in the shadows. You tell yourself it's nothing, just your imagination, but deep down you know better. That's what this was. Only worse. Because this wasn't my imagination. This was real. I clenched the flashlight tighter, fingers slick with sweat. My voice felt stolen, locked away by the growing dread that whatever was behind me wasn't right. The breathing stopped. Just like that. No shuffle of feet, no retreat into the trees. It just ended, like whoever or whatever was there had vanished into thin air. I forced myself to move, legs shaking as I stumbled towards Jake's tent. Flashlight beam wavered across the clearing, catching a faint glint of something wet on the ground. For a second, I thought it was dew. But when I crouched down to look closer, I realized it wasn't water. It was blood. The footprints, they were smeared now, trailing crimson streaks back towards the woods. But what stopped me cold wasn't the blood or the tracks. It was the fact that there were more of them now. Not one set of footprints, three. Bare, misshapen prints that twisted and dragged like whoever made them wasn't walking on normal feet. I scrambled to Jake's tent, tearing the zipper open. "Jake," I hissed. Flashlight flickered over empty sleeping bag, crumpled and cold. No sign of love him, or Sarah, or Emily. Emily. I stood there, swallowing the lump in my throat as the silence pressed in, thicker than the darkness itself. That's when I noticed it. My breath hanging in the air, misting in the sudden chill. The temperature had dropped. But it wasn't just cold, it was wrong. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like you don't belong here. Like you shouldn't have come. The whistle came again, louder this time, possibly closer. It wasn't human anymore. Sounded jagged, broken, like something was mimicking the sound without understanding how it should work. It echoed through the clearing, bouncing off the trees until it felt like it was coming from every direction at once. And then I saw it. The trees at the edge of the clearing were swaying, not with the wind, but with something moving between them. A shadow too large, too tall, stretching unnaturally in the faint light of the dying fire. Its movements were jerky, like a puppet with tangled strings, but its pace was deliberate, intentional. It stopped just beyond the firelight. For a moment I thought it was gone, until I saw the eyes. They weren't eyes, not really. Just two faint pinpricks of light, like reflections in a predator's gaze. But they didn't blink, didn't waver, just stared unblinking, locked on me. You know that feeling. When you're in a nightmare, and you know you're dreaming, but no matter how hard you try, you can't wake up. That's what this was. A waking nightmare, one I couldn't escape. The whistle came again, long and slow, and this time it felt like an invitation, or a warning. I turned and ran. Didn't look back. Didn't need to. The sound of branches snapping and leaves crunching told me enough. It was following me. Every nerve in my body screamed to keep running. But the forest seemed endless. The trees twisting around me like the ribs of some massive, dying beast. My flashlight barely cut through the darkness, and the beam flickered with every frantic step. Lungs burned. Legs felt like they were about to give out. Then I tripped, sprawling face first into the dirt. Flashlight skittered out of my hand, bulb finally giving up with a soft pop. I lay there for a moment, gasping for air, too terrified to move. Then I heard it again. The whistle, but it wasn't behind me anymore. It was to my left. "Stop it!" I shouted, voice cracking. "What do you want?" The forest didn't answer, of course. Just loomed around me, silent and suffocating. I scrambled to my feet, hands trembling, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. A rock, a branch, anything. That's when I heard the voice. "Chris, is that you?" It was Sarah. I froze, heart pounding in my ears. Couldn't see her, but her voice was unmistakable, echoing softly through the trees. Relief and confusion mixed in my chest. "Sarah, where are you?" I called out, voice trembling. A moment later, she emerged from the shadows. face pale in the moonlight, wearing her jacket, but it was torn, hair matted with dirt and leaves. She looked wrong. Her smile was there, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I've been looking for you," she said, voice soft, almost too calm given everything. "You ran off, and I was worried." "I ran off?" I snapped, fear making me bolder than I felt. Everyone was gone. What happened? Where's Jake? Liam? Emily? Her smile faltered, just for a second. "I don't know. We got separated. But we need to go now. It's not safe here." "No kidding," I muttered, glancing nervously over my shoulder. "There's something out here, Sarah." "Something, oh." She interrupted, tone sharper than I expected. I saw it too. "That's why we need to move." Her urgency was convincing, but something about her still felt off. Couldn't put my finger on it, but the way she avoided my gaze, the way her hands fidgeted at her sides didn't sit right. Still, what choice did I have? Wasn't going to survive out here alone. "Fine," I said, "but we need to find the others." She hesitated just for a second before nodding. "Of course, come on. I think I know a way out." She grabbed my arm, grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me through the trees. She moved quickly, knew exactly where she was going. But her path didn't make sense, winding, looping, like she was leading me in circles. The whistle came again, distant now, but still too close for comfort. "How do you know where we're going?" I asked, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. "I don't," she said quickly, too quickly. I think there's a road this way." But we didn't come from this direction. I pointed out. She stopped dead, spinning to face me. Expression was strange, equal parts frustration and fear. "Do you trust me or not?" she demanded, voice low and urgent. I didn't. Not entirely, but before I could answer, a guttural growl cut through the air. Closer than ever. Didn't have time to argue. We ran. Sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the forest behind us. We reached a small clearing, and Sarah pulled me towards a cluster of rocks. "Hide here," she hissed, pushing me down behind one of the larger boulders. "Stay quiet." "What about you?" I whispered, voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. "I'll distract it," she said, expression unreadable. "Just stay here, okay?" And then she was gone, disappearing into the shadows before I could stop her. I crouched behind the rock, every nerve on edge, as the growling grew louder. Couldn't see it, but I could feel it, a presence in the dark watching, waiting. Then I heard something that made my blood run cold. Sarah's voice. But it wasn't calling out to me, it was whistling, long and slow, the same broken tune that had been haunting us all night. I don't know how long I stayed there, crouched behind that rock, frozen in the dark, but I finally worked up the guts to peek out. The forest was empty. Quiet, too quiet. Then I saw her, Sarah, standing at the edge of the clearing, staring right at me. Face was blank, eyes all glassy, but her lips were curved into that same unsettling smile. "Come on, Chris," she said, voice soft, almost sing-songy. "It's safe now." But it wasn't her voice. Not really. It was too flat, too hollow, like someone wearing her skin had learned to mimic her words. And behind her, just barely visible in the shadows, were the eyes. 2 pinpricks of light, glowing faintly as they watched me. I didn't wait. I bolted. Ran until my legs felt like they'd snap, until my breath came in jagged gasps that tore at my throat. But no matter how far I went, I couldn't shake this feeling that I wasn't running away from anything. I was being herded. The trees seemed to close in tighter, the roots clawing at my feet like hands trying to drag me down. And Sarah's whistle, God, that whistle, it never stopped. Long, slow, and deliberate, like it was winding for the forest itself, carried on a wind that didn't even touch my skin. Sometimes it was close, so close I thought she was right behind me. But when I turned, nothing. Other times it was distant, echoing like it came from every direction at once. Then I burst through the trees and my stomach dropped. It wasn't just any clearing. It was the clearing, the same one we'd set up camp in. The fire pit was smouldering faintly again, the stones arranged in their perfect, unnatural circle. The tents were back, flaps closed, like no one had touched them. I staggered forward, breath catching in my throat. "No," I whispered. "This can't be." A chill ran down my spine when I noticed the tree just beyond the clearing. The white tree. Its jagged trunk loomed like a marker, its presence mocking me. I've been here before. I've never left. The tents were back, all of them, perfectly pitched, the way they'd been before we went to sleep. My stomach twisted. I knew they hadn't been here when I left. I'd seen the empty space. But now they stood there, like nothing had happened, the flaps closed, their shapes too still in the faint light. "Chris," a voice called softly, and my blood turned to ice. It was Jake. His voice was weak, hoarse, coming from one of the tents. "Chris, help me." My instinct screamed run, but my legs wouldn't move. "Jake," I choked out. Where have you been?" No answer. Just the soft, rhythmic rustle of fabric, like something shifting inside the tent. "Chris." This time it wasn't Jake's voice. It was Liam's, coming from another tent. Then Sarah's, then Emily's. One by one, they called out to me, their voices layered over each other. Too smooth, too perfect, like they were reading from the same script. "Chris, help us, Chris, we're hurt, Chris. Don't leave yous." The flap of Jake's tent twitched, and something slid out. Not anything human. It was a hand. Or at least, it was shaped like one. But the fingers were too long, the skin too pale, almost translucent. It gripped the edge of the fabric. Then another hand joined it, pulling the tent flap wider. I stepped back, chest tightening as a shape began to emerge. It was Jake, or something trying to be Jake. His face was wrong, stretched and gaunt, eyes black pits that seemed to eat the light. His mouth hung open wider than it should, jaw creaking like old wood. "Chris," it rasped. Its voice still carried the echo of Jake's, but layered with something else, something deeper, hungrier. The tent beside his moved, then the next, and the next. More of them were coming out, each one twisted, misshapen, their forms shifting like shadows trying to hold a human shape. And behind them, from the dark edges of the clearing, came the sound of Sarah's whistle. Slow, steady, closer. I stumbled back, tripping over the fire pit, and hit the ground hard, head spun. For a second, all I could see was the sky above, the stars faint and distant, winking through the gaps in the trees. Then something moved in my peripheral vision. I turned, heart hammering in my chest, and froze. There was something standing at the edge of the clearing, taller than the trees, body impossibly thin, a silhouette that didn't belong in this world. Its head was wrong too narrow, elongated. Arms hung like lifeless branches. But its face, oh God, its face. It didn't have one, just a smooth, featureless plane that seemed to ripple and shimmer like water in the moonlight. But I knew it was looking at me. I could feel it. The whistling stopped. The silence that followed was unbearable, pressing down on me like a weight. And then, in a voice that wasn't Sarah's, but somehow still was, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here." The words didn't echo, didn't even sound like they were spoken aloud. They just were, filling the space around me, inside me, until they became my own thoughts. The creature stepped forward, and the ground seemed to bend beneath it, the earth rippling like a reflection in disturbed water. The things that had crawled out of the tents froze, heads snapping towards it, as if waiting for a command. "Run," the voice whispered again, but this time it sounded amused. Mocking. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted into the forest, sound of my own ragged breathing barely drowning out the rustle of something massive moving behind me. I bolted into the forest. The sound of my own ragged breathing was barely enough to drown out the rustle of something massive moving behind me. But as I ran, I realized something horrible. The trees weren't where they were supposed to be. They shifted, their trunks sliding in and out of place, the path twisting and looping back on itself, like a labyrinth with no way out. Every step felt heavier, slower, like the ground itself was trying to pull me down. Then I heard it. Sarah's whistle. But this time, it wasn't ahead of me. It was inside my head. It came with words now, her voice weaving through my thoughts like a spider spinning a web. "You can't run, Chris. You never could." As the whistle grew louder, I realized something I hadn't before. Something that sent a cold wave of dread crashing over me. It didn't want to kill me. It wanted to keep me. I kept running, but it didn't matter. The forest wasn't a forest anymore. It was alive, shifting and twisting, trapping me in its grasp. My legs felt heavier with every step, as though the ground was pulling me down, and my lungs burned like fire. Every direction I turned led back to the same place, a darkness. No clearing, no road, no way out. The whistle was constant now, burrowing into my skull. It wasn't just a sound anymore. It was a presence, something alive, wrapping itself around my thoughts like a parasite. Every step I took, every ragged breath I drew, it was there, mocking me, guiding me. "You shouldn't have come here." Sarah's voice echoed in my mind, but it wasn't just her anymore. It was Jake's, Liam's, Emily's, all of them blending together into something that wasn't human. Their voices overlapped, weaving into a symphony of whispers that drowned out even my own thoughts. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. I stumbled to a stop, collapsing against a tree. My legs couldn't carry me anymore. My body was spent. The forest seemed to close in around me, the shadows stretching longer, darker until they swallowed everything. I looked up, desperate for the sky, for the stars, anything to remind me I was still in the real world. But the sky was gone. Above me, there was only blackness, not the darkness of night, but something deeper, something void, something alive. And in that void I saw them, those pinpricks of light. Too many to count, scattered like stars, but wrong. Too sharp, too aware. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was raw, my voice stolen by the same force that had taken everything else. That's when I saw Sarah again. She stepped out from the trees, movements smooth, deliberate. Clothes still torn, hair still matted with dirt, but her face was different. There was no fear there now, no urgency, just a calm, unsettling stillness. Her eyes, empty pools of black that reflected nothing. "You're tired," she said softly, her voice echoing in my mind even though her lips barely moved. "I told you not to run." I tried to back away, but my body wouldn't move. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, pulling me down like quicksand. I clawed at the dirt, but my hands sank deeper with every movement, as though the earth itself had turned against me. "Stop fighting," Sarah whispered. She crouched in front of me, head tilting at an unnatural angle. "It's easier if you don't fight." "Why?" My voice cracked, barely audible. "Why are you doing this?" Her smile widened, stretching her face in a way that wasn't human. "Because you came here," she said simply, as if that explained everything. "Because you heard the whistle." I shook my head, tears streaming down my face. I didn't know. None of you ever do." Her voice was almost gentle now, like a mother comforting a child. "But it doesn't matter. You heard it, and now you belong to it." "What is it?" I whispered. Her eyes flicked towards the darkness behind her, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. It stepped out of the void, its form shifting, unraveling and reforming with every step. It was too tall, too thin, its limbs too long and angular. Its face, if it even had one, smooth and blank. But the worst part was the way it moved. It didn't walk or glide. It folded into existence, like the space around it was bending to its will. "You're part of it now, Chris," Sarah said, her voice fading as the thing approached. "We all are." I tried to scream again, but my voice was gone. My mind was unraveling, the whispers growing louder until I couldn't tell where they ended, and I began. The thing crouched down, its featureless head tilting as if studying me. I could feel it pressing into my thoughts, peeling back my memories, my fears, everything that made me me. And then, finally, I understood. There was no escape. There never had been. This wasn't just a forest. It was a trap. A living, breathing thing that fed on people like me. People foolish enough to stray too far, to hear the whistle, to follow it into the dark. I felt my body sinking deeper into the ground, the cold earth swallowing me whole. Sarah knelt beside me, her hand brushing my arm. Her skin was ice, but her touch felt like it belonged to a stranger. "Don't fight it," she murmured again. "Soon you'll forget, and then it won't hurt anymore." I wanted to fight. I wanted to scream, but as the darkness closed over me, I realized I didn't have the strength. The last thing I saw was Sarah's face, her hollow smile etched into my mind like a scar. The last thing I heard was the whistle, soft and haunting, fading as the world dissolved around me. And then there was nothing. I jolted awake, gasping for air. My body drenched in sweat, hands clutching at the dirt beneath me, solid and real. For a moment, I couldn't move, my mind still trapped in that suffocating nightmare. Heart pounded in my chest, and I frantically looked around. I was in the clearing. The fire was out, but still smouldering faintly, a thin line of smoke curling into the starry sky. The tents were exactly where they had been, untouched. The forest was silent, save for the occasional rustle of leaves in the faint breeze. It was just a dream. Just a terrible, awful dream. I forced myself to sit up, breath still coming in ragged gasps. But as I did, I noticed something that made my stomach twist. My hands were trembling, and beneath the dirt caked on my palms there was something else. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches, as if I'd been clawing at the earth. It wasn't entirely a dream. "You okay?" A voice called softly. I turned to see Jake emerging from his tent, rubbing his eyes. Behind him, Emily and Liam were stirring, their groggy voices breaking the stillness. My words caught in my throat. I wanted to tell them, to scream that something was wrong, that we needed to leave right now. But my mouth felt dry, the words stuck somewhere between my panic and the rational part of my brain that tried to convince me it was just a dream. "What's wrong?" Emily asked, stepping closer, her face etched with concern. You look like you've seen a ghost. I think we're in danger. I finally managed to choke out. My voice sounded foreign to my own ears, shaky and strained. There's something in these woods, something watching us. Jake frowned, his half-awake expression quickly turning skeptical. You had a bad dream, man. That's all it is. You're freaking yourself out. No. I snapped louder than I meant to. The others flinched, and I immediately regretted it, but I couldn't stop it. It wasn't just a dream. I felt it. There's something out there, and we need to leave now. Chris, Lime said carefully, his voice low, like he was trying not to spook me. It's the middle of the night. We're miles from anywhere. Let's just wait until morning, okay? If you're still freaked out, we'll pack up and go in the morning. Morning. The word sent a chill down my spine. I couldn't explain why, but the thought of staying until dawn felt wrong, like something terrible would happen if we didn't leave now. Please, I whispered. Boy, stay here. We can't stay here. Chris, Emily started, but her voice trailed off. Her gaze shifted past me into the forest, and her face went pale. What? I asked, turning to follow her eyes, but there was nothing there, just the trees, dark and impenetrable. I thought I saw. She shook her head, rubbing her arms as if suddenly cold. Never mind. It's probably just a deer or something, Ryan muttered, but his voice lacked conviction. I wanted to argue, to grab them and drag them out of the clearing if I had to. But before I could, the whistle came. Faint at first, so faint it was almost indistinguishable from the wind. My stomach dropped. What the hell is that? Lime asked, his face going pale. I told you. I whispered, my voice barely audible over the rising pitch of the whistle. It's here. The others exchanged nervous glances, and for the first time, I saw fear in their eyes. Maybe we should go, Emily said, her voice trembling. Jake opened his mouth to reply. But before he could, the whistle grew louder, more deliberate, echoing through the trees like it was circling us. The air felt heavier, colder, the oppressive silence closing in again. Grab your stuff? I said, my voice firm now. We're leaving. We scrambled to pack, but something about the air felt wrong, like it was thickening around us, pressing against my chest. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Every time I glanced at the tree line, I expected to see those pinprick eyes staring back at me. As we moved to leave, I felt a tug of déjà vu, like I'd done this before, like I'd already tried to run, only to end up back in the clearing. The thought made my head spin, my pulse quicken. What if I started to think, but the words stuck in my throat? What if there was no way out? What if we were already trapped? The whistle came again, piercing and sharp, cutting through my thoughts. This time, it wasn't distant. It was right behind us. Run! I screamed and we bolted, plunging into the forest. The trees blurred around us, and my heart pounded so loudly I couldn't hear anything else, not the others, not even my own breathing. But as we ran, the forest seemed to shift, the trees warping and twisting like they were alive. I could feel it, an invisible pull, drawing us back no matter which direction we went. Then, suddenly, I burst into a clearing and stopped dead in my tracks. My blood turned to ice. It was the same clearing. The tents were back, the fire smouldering faintly, and standing there, by the edge of the woods, was Sarah. She turned to look at me, her face calm, her eyes empty, and her lips curling into that same unnatural smile. Chris, she said softly, her voice carrying on the wind. You can't leave. You know that. Behind her, the shadows stirred, and those pinprick eyes blinked into existence, one by one. And that's when I realized I wasn't waking up from this, because I'd never left.